All right, so we're diving into Underworld, Blood Wars. This movie review you sent over, I gotta say, it's got me pretty hyped to dig into this one with you.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Whether you're, catching up on the whole Underworld thing or just curious about this movie, or even if you just like action and fantasy films, this is for you.
Definitely.
We've got the plot and the characters, some behind-the-scenes stuff, and, of course, what the critic thought overall.
Right.
And I think there are some interesting things in this one, especially if you've seen the other films.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, this franchise, it's always interesting how they mix mythology, action, and character development,
Yeah, totally. So, the synopsis says, Selene, our favorite death dealer, she's caught between these warring vampires and Lycans again.
Right.
But this time, there are, these new enemies on both sides.
Oh, interesting.
And she's got a daughter now, Eve, who's, the key to some big power.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think about legacy,
Mm-hmm.
Selene's past is coming back to haunt her, and this new generation is rising.
Mm-hmm.
Is Blood Wars trying to tell us something about, inheriting the sins of the past, do you think?
That's a great question. I think the Underworld films, they often touch on themes of lineage and how conflict just keeps repeating itself.
Yeah.
But Blood Wars seems to take it further with Eve. It makes you wonder, how much of our destiny is really set by where we come from?
Exactly. Now, the review calls the plot convoluted. And I know the Underworld series, it can be complex with all the lore.
Yeah.
So for fans who've been following along, is that part of what they like, or does it ever get too confusing, even for them?
I think it's a balancing act. The fans who've been there from the beginning, they might really dig into those intricate storylines,
right?
Like solving a puzzle. But for someone who's new to the series, starting with the 5th film, might be a bit much. It could turn off people who aren't already invested in the whole mythology.
Definitely. And speaking of investment, Kate Beckinsale is back as Selene. And the review says still Kate Beckinsale, kicking butt.
As always.
But does Selene actually grow in this film?
Mm-hmm.
Or is she just the same Selene we already know?
I think Beckinsale, she always delivers a great performance. But with Selene's character in Blood Wars, it's debatable.
Okay.
Some people might say she doesn't really change that much emotionally. She's still driven by revenge and protecting people she cares about, which, we've already seen.
So maybe not much of change for Selene. What about Theo James as David? The review says he gets more backstory and responsibility.
Yes.
Does that feel like they're trying to bring some new energy to the story?
I think so. Giving David a bigger role, it could be a way to draw in fans who liked him in the previous films, especially his connection to Selene. It also opens up possibilities for future stories, maybe even moving away from Selene eventually.
Interesting. So we have returning characters, potential changes in focus. But what about the villains? The review wasn't impressed.
Right.
They said they're not as memorable as past Underworld villains. Called them weak, even. I mean, I kind of see that, but I think Marius, he has a creepy presence, don't you think?
Oh, he does, yeah. Marius definitely has a certain intensity, but I think compared to Lucian or Victor from the earlier films, he just doesn't have the same depth.
Yeah.
Those villains, they had reasons for what they did, motivations. They even had this twisted sense of honor. They really challenged Selene and made her face her own dark side.
You're right.
Marius just feels like, an obstacle, just something to get past.
That's a good point. It's not just about being scary. It's about connecting to the deeper themes of the film. So let's talk about the technical side of things. The review liked the visuals, especially that dark Gothic look that Underworld is known for.
Yeah, visually it's stunning.
But it also mentioned a lot of CGI.
Mm-hmm.
You see that a lot in action movies now. But is it working here? I mean, are the Lycans believable?
Mm-hmm.
Or do they feel like they're from a video game?
That's the big question with CGI, isn't it? Does it help tell the story, or does it distract from it? With Blood Wars, the criticism seems to be that the CGI feels a bit separate from the real stuff, the practical effects.
Yeah, I see that.
Some critics felt like the Lycans, especially, weren't as real, as tangible, as in the older films.
So it's not just about how much CGI there is, it's about how it fits with the overall style. Okay, so what about the sound and music? The review said it was pretty typical for the franchise, nothing too special.
Yeah, the music and sound effects, they get a good job of building the atmosphere and the action, but they don't really do anything new or different.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
One thing the review mentioned was how fast the movie is.
Right.
Almost too fast.
Right.
Some people might like that nonstop action. But could it also make the plot feel rushed? Does the pacing, take away from the emotional impact?
I think it can go either way. A fast pace, it can be exciting, especially in a series known for action. But if it's too fast, it can make it harder to connect with the characters and really feel what's at stake. You need those quiet moments to breathe and understand what's happening emotionally.
That's true. Even in an action film, those quieter moments are really important for grounding the story. Now, the review also pointed out that the director, Anna Foerster, is the first woman to direct an Underworld film.
Oh, that's right.
Do you think that brought a different style or focus to the film?
That's a good question. It's hard to say for sure if Foerster brought a specifically female perspective.
Right.
But some critics said her action sequences felt new and dynamic. Maybe there's a subtle shift in focus, but it's really up to the viewer to decide.
I like that. It's always cool to see a franchise try new things. But even with a new director, the review still had some criticisms. Predictable story, weak villains, too much CGI. Are those fair criticisms for this kind of movie? Or is that just part of what Underworld is?
I think it depends on who you ask. For the hardcore fans, those things might be part of what they love about the series. It's what they expect. But for other people, those same things might feel stale or unoriginal.
Yeah.
It really comes down to what each person is looking for in a movie.
That makes sense. Some people want what they know, while others want something that surprises them. So the review kind of suggests that Underworld, Blood Wars, it's enjoyable for fans, but doesn't really do anything to bring in new viewers. Would you agree?
Based on the review and what we've talked about, yeah, I think that's fair. It seems like it gives the fans what they want, but doesn't really push the boundaries of the genre or the franchise.
So probably not the best place to start if you're new to the series.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which makes me wonder, if someone is curious about Underworld, is this the movie to start with? Or would you recommend starting somewhere else?
Honestly, I'd say start with the first Underworld film.
Yeah.
It sets up the whole series, introduces the main characters.
Right.
And the story's a little easier to follow, I think. Plus, it really gets into how the whole vampire-Lycan feud started, which is, kind of important.
You think knowing that origin story is crucial for understanding the later films?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
it
yeah.
sets up the rules of their world, the power struggles and this deep hatred between them.
Yeah.
Without that, I think the later films might just feel like, any other action movie with cool special effects.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's best to start at the beginning to really get the whole picture. So, to recap our deep dive into Underworld, Blood Wars, it sounds like we have a sequel. Right. It's action-packed, has the things we expect from the series. Kate Beckinsale's great, as always.
Yeah.
Some cool visuals, but maybe not the most groundbreaking Underworld film.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. It seems to give the fans what they want, but doesn't really try anything totally new.
All right, so before we wrap up, any final thoughts on Blood Wars or the Underworld series in general? We talked about the criticisms, like the storylines being a bit repetitive.
Yeah.
If you were in charge of this franchise, where would you take it next?
Yeah.
What stories haven't been told in this world?
Well, there's definitely room to do something new, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The Underworld universe, it has a lot of potential.
Okay.
A prequel could be really cool, exploring how that feud began, maybe even going back to, the very first vampire and Lycan.
Yeah.
Or a spin-off, focusing on a character we don't know much about, or a smaller group, like the vampire elders or Lycan packs that aren't part of the main conflict.
A prequel, I like that.
Yeah.
Imagine seeing that world before the war, those first meetings between vampires and Lycans that started it all.
Yeah, exactly. And, they could even explore the human perspective more.
Oh, yeah.
We see a little of how the war affects humans, but a story from a human's point of view, caught in the middle of it all, that could add a whole new layer to the story.
I love that. Seeing this hidden world through the eyes of someone who's totally out of their element, just trying to survive while these ancient beings are fighting all around them.
Right.
It would be a fresh take on the whole vampire Lycan thing.
It would. And the action and suspense would be different, too. Instead of these big battles, it would be more about, personal struggles to survive, which could be just as exciting.
Okay, those are some great ideas. Hollywood, if you're listening, we're full of them. But seriously, it's cool to think about how this franchise could change and keep things interesting.
Right.
And hey, maybe this conversation will spark something for a future Underworld film.
I hope so.
We'd love to see those prequels and spin-offs happen. I think people would really be into those kinds of stories.
I agree. The Underworld world has so much to offer.
So much potential.
No,
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our Underworld. Blood Wars Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We talked about the plot, the characters, the good and the bad.
Right.
And all those exciting possibilities for the future.
Hopefully we gave you something to think about, whether you're a big fan or just starting to learn about Underworld.
And hey, even if Blood Wars isn't like the most groundbreaking film, it sounds like it's still a fun, action-packed movie for fans of the series.
And sometimes that's all you need, right? Absolutely. Sometimes you just want to escape into a world with cool action and supernatural stuff. And it sounds like Underworld. Blood Wars definitely does that.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Underworld, Blood Wars.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us as we explore this world of vampires and Lycans.
It's always fun to break down these kinds of films.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing, and maybe we'll catch you on the flip side for another deep dive into something awesome.
Yeah. It's cool that we get to do these deep dives, you know. We can really explore all the different parts of a film.
Yeah.
It's like we can appreciate it on, like, different levels.
Right.
From the action and visuals to, like, the deeper themes.
Absolutely.
It's about going beyond just, like, did I like it? And asking, why did I like it? Or, you know, what could they have done differently?
Totally.
It's about, like, really thinking about the movie.
I agree.
And it's been so much fun talking about this with you. We found some really interesting things about Underworld. Blood Wars.
And who knows, maybe we even gave some future filmmakers some ideas.
I hope so. It's always cool to see fans getting into these stories and, you know, imagining what could happen next.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for our Underworld, Blood Wars Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of vampires and Lycans. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Take care.
Bye.